Right, UFC 297. Malcolm Gordon versus Jimmy Flick. And I know it's going to sound stupid on paper, but I actually think Jimmy Flick can get a submission in the first round against Malcolm Gordon. Because Malcolm Gordon, when he is striking, he looks so uncomposed and off balance. He puts on like a high pace early by applying a lot of forward pressure, but you'll notice with him, he's overreaching at times, which can cause him to slip over and fall to the ground and become off balance. In addition to that, he likes to mix up a lot of wrestling, and I think if you want to use wrestling, you do not want to do it against Jimmy Flick, because Malcolm Gordon isn't a guy with like very vicious ground and pound. When he takes people down to the ground, especially in the UFC, it's a lot of just getting control time. And I think if you try and lie on the ground with Jimmy Flick and try and look for control time, he will snatch a submission. And he could even snatch a submission from when Malcolm Gordon is overreaching, loses his balance, and then Jimmy Flick jumps onto a guillotine. But the only issue with Jimmy Flick is takedowns aren't really that great. Very bad chin. I'll say very bad durability is a better word to use. And Malcolm Gordon, he doesn't really have the best takedowns either, but he hasn't got very good takedown defense either. So it's like a battle of the bad bunch. I don't know what word to use to describe it, but I do think Jimmy Flick can just steal a submission because of Malcolm Gordon not being able to keep his balance on the feet. But the alternative thing that could happen is Malcolm Gordon doesn't look to wrestle and just tries to keep it on the feet and strike. But knowing him, I cannot see that happening. I can see him bringing it down to the ground and ruining it for himself. Right, Yohan Lainesse versus Sam Patterson. Unfortunately, I actually do think Sam Patterson will win this fight via second round submission, because with Yohan Lainesse, he's quite good in the first round. Well, I'll say sometimes, but his cardio is a massive failure for him. Because you look at the second fight with, what was his name? Not second fight, second round with Darian Weeks. Output goes down. And even in the first round, he doesn't pressure too much. Usually you see him on the back foot trying to like counter off his opponent's mistakes. And with Sam Patterson, he comes into fights very confident and he starts to strike and doesn't look for takedowns. But because Yohan Lainesse, in my opinion, is going to be very patient on the back foot, I don't think anything's really going to happen in the first round. And I don't think he's got the power of a Yanal Ashmus, because who has Yohan Lainesse knocked out in the UFC apart from his Contender Series? He's looked very poor. And it might be like when he's in front of a big crowd, he can't really perform. Like, in my opinion, he should be 0-3 in the UFC. He shouldn't have beaten Darian Weeks. And I think Sam Patterson came up against Yanal Ashmus, who was just a horrible matchup for him. And Sam Patterson, I'm not going to lie, has got terrible striking defense. But because Yohan Lainesse will slow down, it's going to make it so much easier for Sam Patterson to look to get them takedowns. And I think that's what's going to end up winning him the fight in the second round. He'll gas out, and then Sam Patterson will apply the pressure, go for the takedown, and then lock in a rear naked choke. So that's how I see that happening. Right, so Serhiy Sidey versus Roman Taveras. I'm going with Serhiy Sidey to beat Roman Taveras, and I'm going to predict it will be in the second round. Because the first fight he had, it was an early stoppage, and that fight shouldn't have been stopped at that point. Whether you think he was going to finish him, you have to give him more time. He dropped him with that straight right. Referee jumps in and panics. So I think the next time they fight, we are going to see a similar type of fight where Serhiy Sidey is applying pressure. But the difference between the two is Serhiy Sidey moves his head, Taveras doesn't. But what Taveras will do is he'll try and measure the distance and try and push you up against the cage and wait until your back is like up against the cage, and then fire off with his other hand. He's a tricky southpaw, and I think by doing that method, it's going to be very hard to measure the distance and keep your hand in front of Sidey, because he's always moving his head. He's not one of these like UFC fighters who doesn't really move their head and is trying to be really offensive, compared to Taveras, who's more central. It's not really like an amazing footwork guy either, so I can see him becoming not flat-footed but very stationary compared to Serhiy, who's a bit more fluid with his movements. And I don't think the fight's going to go down to the ground either, because it will cancel out, because Roman Taveras has got good jiu-jitsu, but so does Serhiy Sidey, and none of them are really known for wrestling with their opponents. So I think it might be a high quality striking fight. And I think Sidey is going to KO him in round 2 after they've filled each other out in the first round. Not in a weird way. Right, Charles Jourdain versus Sean Woodson. Believe it or not, I'm actually going with Sean Woodson to win a 29-28 decision over Charles Jourdain. Sean Woodson is a fighter who, he's a volume striker who can carry power at times, but you don't really think of him as a powerful striker. But he's got very slick boxing, very good head movement, and I've noticed with Charles Jourdain, he struggles against fighters who can put a good pace on him and apply pressure. And I think against Sean Woodson, at times we can see him counter-strike, but I think the amount of volume of strikes that he'll throw at Charles Jourdain, he's going to struggle to deal with it. Because you'll notice with Charles Jourdain, you see he gets a bunch of submissions, but a lot of the time, they come from the opponent taking him down. Or an opponent losing balance and falling over, like Lando Venata when his trousers fell down. Like, they're the type of things which he's able to capitalise on. So I think this will be a hard fight for him unless Sean Woodson starts to mix up the grappling. If he does that, I can see Charles Jourdain easily jumping onto the head and getting a guillotine. But in my opinion, what I think is going to happen in the fight is Sean Woodson is very long, remember. He's 6'2", as a featherweight, very tall. He's going to use that jab to establish the range, and he's going to stop Charles Jourdain coming forward and maybe looking for a takedown by throwing the front kicks. But like I've mentioned before, he doesn't really use grappling. So him throwing front kicks is going to make it even harder for Charles Jourdain to even think about going for that. So I think it'll be a 29-28 decision for Sean Woodson. Remember, 46-3 as a boxer when he was younger as well. Brad Katona versus Garrett Armfield. I'm going with Brad Katona to win via decision. I cannot see Garrett Armfield winning this fight. They're like levels apart in terms of skill. Brad Katona at UFC 292 against Cody Gibson, he was at a massive disadvantage in terms of weight and size. Cody Gibson was way taller, he looked bigger, longer reach, and he was able to deal with him in the pocket. But it was when he was stealing the rounds in like the last few minutes. And against Garrett Armfield, he kind of fights very low. He kind of like level changes over and over again to then get low and find the chin and then shoot out on that jab. But that's all he's really got about him, and then the cross after. Brad Katona's got extremely high advanced striking combinations. 1 minute you're seeing him circle off to the left, throw a jab, and then he'll go to the leg kick, and then he'll come straight to the body, follow up with an uppercut, then by a hook. He mixes everything up, and in MMA it's hard to find a fighter like Katona who will mix up the striking to that capacity. He's got very maybe he's not like a knockout guy, obviously not, but he's got very technical striking, but with extremely versatile combinations that I haven't seen from a lot of fighters. And Garrett Armfield, all he's got is power, and I think as the rounds go by, the only round where he might deal with some good success is in the first round, because you look at that fight with Kazama against him, he was able to just push him up against the cage, but Brad Katona, he don't keep us back in the cage. He's always moving. So although he hasn't got like amazing head movement, he's willing to come forward and fight with you in the pocket, leading off with that hook. But like I said, mixing up a bunch of combinations that you can't even predict. Right, Arnold Allen versus Movsar Evloev. You can see I've picked Arnold Allen to win the fight, and I'm picking him to do it via decision. Because Movsar Evloev, he's shown he's got a chin on him. But in my opinion, Arnold Allen can do what Diego Lopes couldn't do. Not with submissions, but can hurt Movsar Evloev. Because I've noticed when Movsar Evloev is throwing punches, he doesn't protect his chin. So he gets caught. And with Arnold Allen, you could say he does it. But he only does it once he knows he's hurt his opponent. So he'll fight with a very compact guard, and say he hurts his opponent, then he'll start swinging and then looking for the finish, and he's not protecting his chin at that point, which could leave him open to a counter. But with Movsar Evloev, without even hurting his opponent, he's already not protecting his chin, and Arnold Allen's defense, in my opinion, is much better. And trying to take down Arnold Allen is very hard. Like, he has got extremely good takedown defense. So Movsar Evloev, he will get him down once in the fight, but you've got to remember Arnold Allen is balanced in all areas. Like, you take him down, he's got the jiu-jitsu to catch you off guard. Like we've seen with Movsar Evloev, he can be caught in joint submissions. We don't really see Arnold Allen use them. It's usually like chokes compared to joint submissions, but I think he's going to be able to stop some of the takedowns early and force Movsar Evloev to use that combat sambo on the feet, and Arnold Allen is going to be able to outstrike him by throwing more volume than Movsar Evloev. But the only thing I worry about him is, if he overthrows, say he hurts Movsar Evloev, he does leave himself open to get taken down, even though he's got a good takedown defense because of how strong Movsar Evloev's takedowns are. But that's all about whether Arnold Allen can rock him. If he just goes out there and fights how he fought against Qatar, very patient, waiting for his opening, attacking the leg, and then exploding to the head, he'll be fine. But it's if, and I say if, he hurts him and he gets over-aggressive, that's where the problem goes. So Arnold Allen's winning it for me. Chris Curtis versus Marc-Andre Barriault. I'm going with Chris Curtis to win the fight by KO, and I think he's going to leave it late, round 3. Because with Chris Curtis, he takes so long to get going and he throws away fights that he could actually win. And Marc-Andre Barriault, after his last fight with Eryk Anders, I'm worried that he will slow down. He's meant to have good cardio, but when you get hit in the body over and over and over again, you start to slow down. And he was in the last fight, even though he won. And Chris Curtis, he's shown that he can have some powerful body shots. Go back and watch that fight with Kelvin Gastelum. So I think in the first round you will see Marc-Andre Barriault, for once actually, not for once, but pressuring Chris Curtis, because he was pressuring in fights before Eryk Anders, and Chris Curtis would just be holding up that high guard, not really doing anything, maybe absorbing shots to the body himself, but then in round 2 he'll start to step up the volume, hitting Marc-Andre Barriault with shots to the body, and because he don't block them, they're going to hurt him. Like, he might get dropped with a body shot. But if I actually had to make a prediction, I think he's going to flatline KO him in the 3rd round after ripping his body to shreds and then firing off to the head of Marc-Andre Barriault and knocking him out cold. And remember, Marc-Andre Barriault's taller than Chris Curtis. He's not really that tall, but he's got a good reach. And he's known for waiting on his opponent and then firing his powerful shot. That's what Chris Curtis does, counter-strike. But he needs to increase the volume and work capacity, because he's going to throw away this fight if he doesn't get going in the 2nd round. But I do think he should be able to get a KO in the last round. Neil Magny versus Mike Malott. Obviously Mike Malott is just, I'm going to say by submission, and I'm going to say he will do it in the 2nd round, because Neil Magny is just not good enough, in my opinion, to compete with people like Mike Malott. He's a gatekeeper for strikers and people who aren't going to bring him down and who are going to try and strike with him on the feet, to the point where Neil Magny's goal is to just hug them against the cage or get into like a snooze fest and grind out like a sloppy win. Like, remember that fight with Philip Rowe? You could give that to Philip Rowe, but it's because it's such a slugfest, it was so hard to score, it goes to Neil Magny, and this fight is just a horrible matchup for him. Because Mike Malott, he's explosive, he's raw. I think he can overwhelm Neil Magny with his striking. And we've seen when he gets overwhelmed with striking, he looks lost. So like, look at Neil Gary. Not Neil Gary, I've forgotten his name. Ian Gary. And even then, we know Mike Malott isn't going to put in a striking showcase like that. But he will outbox Neil Magny on the feet, despite Neil Magny having the longer reach. I really believe that, because Mike Malott has now proven that he's a good striker. But what he'll actually do is a look to bring the fight down to the ground. And because Neil Magny's takedown defense is not really that good when he comes up against a striker, when he comes up against a wrestler, I believe Mike Malott should be able to quickly single leg him down to the ground, not really worry about Neil Magny trying to be offensive and get a submission, and then just control him whilst he's on the ground, and then find the submission in round 2. I think round 1 he won't look to go for like the ground game. I think he'll look to strike and like have a feel for how good his striking is, and then 2nd round look to mix in the grappling, wins the fight, submission, and I'm going to predict he's going to beat him by a rear naked choke. Just quickly, this is a horrible co-main event. This is what happens when Amanda Nunes has gone. It just ruined this bantamweight division. Well, that's an exaggeration. We've got some good people coming up, but this co-main event, in my opinion, is just horrific. And if I was going to pick, I'm going to have to go with Bueno Silva by submission, and I think she can do it in the 1st round. That's all I'm going to say about the fight for now. I'm not really interested in it, but it's a co-main event and we're going to have to watch it anyway. So yeah, got that impressive win over Holly Holm, but a test then cost her the win and it got overturned. But yeah, so we'll move on. Right, Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. I've been sitting here for God knows how long trying to think to who could win. First I thought Strickland was going to win, but then when I actually sat there and thought more logically in my head, I believe du Plessis is going to win this fight, and I think it's going to be via a KO/TKO, and I believe he's going to do this in round 3. That's my prediction. Because with Dricus du Plessis, one thing you have to remember is his nose has been destroyed for a very long time, which has been impacting his performance. Like, look at that fight with Darren Till. His striking looked woeful in that fight. And that was because he could barely breathe properly. And he was like fighting like he was drunk. And that's how he fights. He's got one of the most unconventional ways of striking. Awkward, whatever word you want to use. That it's very hard to defend against it. Like Robert Whittaker defensively has been good. Yes, he's been dropped sometimes in a fight. But usually he's very good defensively. And he looks a level above people like Cannonier and some of the other middleweights below. That's why he wasn't defeated for a good few years apart from Adesanya. And with Sean Strickland, we know he's got extremely good defence, but he doesn't offer any threat in terms of KO where he could do any damage to Dricus du Plessis, in my opinion. Like, I don't even see him dropping du Plessis because Sean Strickland is very defensive. He'll walk forward and march you down, but he doesn't really care. He has an approach to fights where he just goes out there to fight with no like logical thinking at times, but he has just got extremely good striking defense. But I think du Plessis is going to be able to break that because one, he looks like he is very big. Like for this weight class, I know middleweights are quite big naturally, but he looks very big. Like he looks like a heavyweight sometimes in there. Like a very small heavyweight, so probably a light heavyweight. I'm probably exaggerating, but I just think that power jab of du Plessis could cause problems by Strickland because he doesn't just throw like a normal jab. He kind of like angles off his body into a position where he sneaks in punches. For example, throws a jab against Robert Whittaker and you see him land like this wide hook. And you might think that because he's swinging wide and Strickland's more of a like straight punch fighter, but which he can loop at times, but more of a straight punch striker, he's going to struggle to land these type of strikes. But I don't think he will, because I haven't mentioned the grappling game of him. Yeah, you see Sean Strickland on Instagram and other like social medias doing well when he's training with people like Magomed Ankalaev, but you've got to remember, Dricus du Plessis is an extremely strong wrestler to the point where I think against Israel Adesanya, he would have huge problems because his wrist control on the ground is very strong. Like we saw Abbas Magomedov take down Sean Strickland early. He was able to get up, but I will say this, Abbas is nowhere near as good or as big as a guy like du Plessis. So if du Plessis gets him down, he's very good at transitioning. And look at the fight with Roberto Soldic in the first one. He took the back of Roberto Soldic, and if it weren't for the bell to go, he would have submitted him. But I don't think it's a fight where he submits Sean Strickland because he has got a good BJJ game on the ground, offensively and defensively, but he doesn't care about that. And he's shown that he'll probably go out there just trying to look to strike and look to just like be patient with him. I don't think he's going to rush him, and I don't think du Plessis' back's always going to be up against the cage. Maybe in the first round it might be, but you'll see with du Plessis, he will always in the second round look to come forward at one point. The only times we've seen him stay on the back foot was against Darren Till, and his nose was like completely destroyed. And even then he tried to blitz him at times. But he's got a very like explosive blitz approach, and I think that will cause problems with Strickland. Because we've seen when he comes up against people who can blitz him, for example, Jared Cannonier, Alex Pereira. I know they're two different types of striking, but when he can get hit with like a flash, powerful strike, we can see Strickland get hurt. And he hasn't got a bad chin. Eliseo Zaleski's done it. Hits him with a flash, powerful shot out of nowhere. He can go down. And I think a guy like du Plessis, who can blitz you and is big and can also take you down, who's got the full package offensively, it's just we're worried about how does he deal with Strickland defensively. That's the main thing I'd look at. But remember, Sean Strickland's not a finisher. So how is he going to finish a guy like du Plessis? Maybe if he gets tired in the later rounds, that's one thing to look out for. But in my opinion, the fight is still a 50-50 fight. But I've now swung into the favour of Dricus du Plessis to get a finish in this fight and then become champion. And another thing I forgot to mention about Sean Strickland. He's saying how he would stab du Plessis. Deep down we know he wouldn't do that. I know he's wild and we saw the brawl that happened, but why would he admit to doing a crime like that? But I know deep down he's just saying that because he doesn't like what he said, which was bad by du Plessis. But Strickland, we do know, also does have some like brutal takes on certain topics, but we know him for that. So that's why Sean Strickland's now had an outburst at du Plessis for something that is very wrong as well. But anyways, apart from talking about that, I think du Plessis is going to take over the fight from the second round and apply a lot of pressure to Strickland, and he'll start to back up and he'll get caught and he'll be put down. And remember, he's got some good leg kicks as well. I forgot to mention of du Plessis. Like, Jared Cannonier had some good success with kicking. I know Adesanya didn't, but that was because he was always going backwards. When Cannonier came forwards, he was able to land good leg kicks. Du Plessis has landed good leg kicks against a guy like Soldic. So if he can take the sting out of Sean Strickland's punches, it might even make it easier for him to take him down. He might even get a ground and pound finish because he can do some vicious things on the ground. Look at them elbows he did on Robert Whittaker. Cut him open badly. Threw him down to the ground like he's a boy. Like, judo throwed him. Couldn't get back up. And I think this is going to be a hard fight for Sean Strickland. So yeah, I'm going with du Plessis to win via KO. Thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.